Hello everyone, welcome to our next program in our 2021 summer reading lineup. My name is Anna and I'm with the Tampa-Hillsborough County Public Library, and we are happy to have Dr. Naima Johnston Bush here with us today. This program would not be possible without her and the funding provided by the Tampa-Hillsborough County Children's Library Foundation. So a hearty thank you to you all. Today's book shout out is a fun American tall tale called Mike Finn by Stephen Kellogg. So check out that book and more by him in our card catalog. Also, don't forget to register and log your summer reading hours at hcplc.beanstack.org. There's still time to win some really cool prizes if you do. So, special note about today's program, it is part of the 40th annual Tampa-Hillsborough County Storytelling Festival. This year, the Storytelling Festival is being held virtually through August 5th. There are still many opportunities to participate, so go on, check it out. Festival participation is open to students aged 6 to 18 who have the opportunity to enjoy performances from professional storytellers, like the one we're watching today, learn the art of storytelling from storytellers, and have a chance to create and submit their own storytelling video. For more information, go to hcplc.org/storytelling festival. So without further ado, give it up for Dr. Naima Johnston Bush presenting Mama Griot's Tall Tales.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Naima Johnston Bush. It's an honor to be back with the Tampa-Hillsborough Public Library System. And I'm going to tell you some tall tales. But first, before I start that, let me tell you what a griot is, because a lot of people don't know. I'm Mama Griot, and a griot is a West African storyteller. It's a tradition that dates back hundreds and hundreds of years. And a storyteller, a griot, takes the community's stories and passes them down orally. So they have stories from years and years and years ago that they've told repeatedly. And every time they tell, the story might change a little bit, but it's a way to preserve culture and history and moral life lessons for the community of which they serve. So I serve as a griot. And today I'm going to tell some stories that are from the American West, and they're known as tall tales. Now, what is a tall tale? A tall tale is a story with unbelievable elements related as if they were factual and true. So I'm telling you a story with amazing detail, exaggeration, characteristics that seem impossible, but I'm going to tell it to you like it's a true story, okay? And a lot of these true life exaggerations are based on true life. So a lot of these exaggerated stories, these tall tales, are based on real live people. Although, like legend and myth, these people have become bigger than life and the story has changed somewhat. A tall tale contains the following characteristics, right? The characters are bigger than life and they're given bigger than life characteristics. So in other words, they are bigger, stronger, and smarter than the average person. And they have a problem they have to solve. And then they solve the problem in a way that's very hard to believe. So we're going to hear some problems that like Paul Bunyan faced and how he solved these problems, and they're impossible ways that you could believe them. The details in the story are exaggerated, and tall tales, like I said, can be traced back to the American West during the 1800s when the settlers were expanding the nation. They told these stories to encourage each other after long days of farming, logging, battling the weather, conflict, war, what else? Doing the railroad, building the railroad. These stories served as a form of entertainment because they had no internet access. They had no PlayStation. They had no TV, no cable. They couldn't get around the way we could get around. So they told these stories as a form of entertainment after a long day's hard work. And these stories also encourage critical thinking. So a way to look at a problem in a different light to solve the problem. And they were facing a lot of problems on the frontier. So let's get into it. Let's tell our tall tales, because I'm not going to be before you very long, but I do have 3 that I want to share with you. And before we get started, we are going to attempt, now we are having some technical difficulties, but we're going to attempt to do a poll. And this particular poll is going to ask you how many of you know or have heard of each of the tall tales that I am going to um, share with you. So which of the tall tales have you heard of? Select one or more of the following: John Henry, Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind, or Paul Bunyan. So if you would check that and submit it, we'll take a look at the poll results. But I want to start with imagination. Okay, so imagine that you are sitting on the prairie. If you don't know what the prairie is, it's like it's before there were houses, before, well, the prairie still exists, but before there were houses, it's dry, it's nothing to see for miles around. It's the middle of America, and it's hot, and you've worked all day, so the sun has gone down, and you're sitting on the prairie around a campfire, and it's late at night, and you can't sleep, so you get up to hear the storytellers tell these tales. The moon is full, the moon is bright, it shined down, and you can see a little bit into the shadows, but not much. And then all of a sudden you hear a coyote howl. I wasn't gonna do a coyote howl, but you hear a coyote howl, and you snuggle close to your mom or to your dad or to your loved one, and you settle in to hear the stories of John Henry, Paul Bunyan, and Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind. And this particular story is about John Henry. Now, some of you may have heard of John Henry, but John Henry has a song, and it's actually the Ballad of John Henry. And it goes like this: when John Henry was a tiny baby, sitting on his mama's knee, he picked up a hammer and a little piece of steel, said, "Hammer's gonna be the death of me. Yes, Lord, this hammer's gonna be the death of me." John Henry was a man just 6 feet high, nearly 2 feet and a half across his breast. He'd hammer with a 9-pound hammer all day, and he never got tired and went to rest. Oh Lord, he never got tired and went to rest. John Henry went up to the mountain, and he looked one eye straight up its side. The mountain was so tall and John Henry was so small. He laid down his hammer and he cried, "Lord, Lord." He laid down his hammer and he cried. John Henry said to his captain, "Captain, you can go to town. Bring me back a 12-pound hammer, please. I'll beat that steam drill down. Lord, Lord, I will beat that steam drill down." The captain said to John Henry, "I believe this mountain's sinking in." But John Henry said, "Captain, just you stand aside. It's nothing but my hammer catching wind. Oh Lord, it's nothing but my hammer catching wind." John Henry said to his shaker, "Shaker boy, you better start to pray. 'Cause if my 12-pound hammer missed this little piece of steel, tomorrow's gonna be your burying day. Oh Lord, tomorrow's gonna be your burying day." John Henry said to his captain, "A man is nothing but a man. But before I let your steam drill beat me down, I'll die with a hammer in my hand. Lord, Lord, I die with a hammer in my hand." The man that invented the steam drill, he figured he was mighty high and fine. But John Henry sunk that steel down 14 feet, while the steam drill only drilled 9. Lord, Lord, the steam drill only made 9. John Henry hammered on the right side. Steam drill kept driving on the left. John Henry beat that steam drill down, but he hammered his poor heart to death. Oh Lord, he hammered his poor heart to death. Well, they carried John Henry down the tunnel, and they laid his body in the sand. Now every woman riding on a C&O train says, there lies my steel driving man, oh Lord, there lies my steam driving man. So that's the Ballad of John Henry. And as you can tell from the story, if you are listening to the lyrics, which I know sometimes it's hard to catch them all, but John Henry, 58% of the people have heard of John Henry. Only 4% of the people have heard of Sally Ann Thunder and Whirlwind. And 67% of the people have heard of Paul Bunyan. So John Henry actually, the story goes that he was working on the railroad and they brought the steam drill in, and they said that the steam drill was going to take the place of the men that were working. Well, John Henry didn't like that, and he said, I can beat the steam drill. Let's have a contest. And so they had a contest, and the shaker boy, I was telling you about the shaker boy in the song, was the guy who held the little piece of steel that John Henry had to hit. And if you missed while you were swinging that hammer, then you definitely was going to be your burying day, right? So he worked with a shaker, and he took his hammer, he hit this little piece of steel, and he blasted holes in rocks to lay the railroad. And so what happened was they had this contest, and John Henry won, and he hammered so hard that he died. Well, John Henry is actually based on a real person named John Henry. And the song dates back to the 1870s. And there are numerous versions of this song, but I chose the one that told the story in the most complete version. So he was a former Union soldier who many believe was arrested for petty theft and sent to the penitentiary, and later was farmed out or loaned out to work on the railroad. So sometimes, you see prisoners working out on the highway today, picking up trash. It's the same concept. So he was out doing the railroad. And it's also a documented fact that they would have these contests with the steam drive engines to see who was faster. And so it probably did happen. Now, it is thought that John Henry did die um, working on the railroad, but not because he had this battle with the steam engine, but because he caught a lung disease from breathing in all of the debris from all of the rocks that he broke. And so that is the story of John Henry. So let's move on to our next story, which is about Paul Bunyan. Imagine, if you can, the excitement that was caused by the birth of Paul Bunyan. It took five giant stalks, working overtime to deliver him to his parents. He cut his teeth on a PV pole and grew so fast that after 1 week, he had to wear his daddy's clothes. After 1 week, his lungs were so strong he could empty a whole pond full with frogs with one holler. As a baby, Paul's clothing was so large they had to use wagon wheels for buttons. They used a lumber wagon drawn by a team of oxen as a baby carriage. When he outgrew this, his parents put him on a raft off the coast of Maine. It is said that the rocking in his sleep he caused huge waves which sunk many ships. He would eat 40 bowls of porridge just to whet his appetite, 40 whole bowls. As a child, Paul played with an axe and a crosscut saw like other children played with toys. On his first birthday, his father gave him a big blue ox named Babe. Babe grew to be 7 axe handles tall and a plug of tobacco wide between the eyes, and as a snack, he would eat 30 bales of hay, wire and all. Paul and Babe were so large that the tracks they made gallivanting around Minnesota created the 10,000 lakes that Minnesota is now famous for. Paul liked to work with big men. He was a lumberjack, and the most famous were his 7 axemen. They were all named Elmer, all 7 of them. So when he called, they all came running. No grindstone was large enough to grind the axes that they held, so they sharpened them by holding them against large stones rolling down a hill. Each of these men were over 6 feet tall sitting down and weighed over 300 pounds. The year of the 2 winters, it got so cold that the axemen let their beards grow full length. They wrapped the beards around them for warmth. In the spring, Paul cut all the beards with a large knife. The whiskers were stacked like hay and later sold for making mattresses. The year of the 2 winters, the snow was so deep that Paul Bunyan had to dig down to the trees to continue logging operations, which he easily did. It got so cold that his boiling coffee froze so fast it was still hot when it was frozen. When the men spoke, their words froze in midair, and when it thawed in the spring, there was all sorts of chattering all around for weeks, chatter, chatter, chatter. During the slack season, Paul's men made him a pipe. This wasn't easy. They had to select a special giant hickory tree and haul it in on 2 flat cars so they could work on it. Wow, what a pipe. In the early days, Paul's smoking never bothered anyone, but he began to blow it west to keep his forest air clear. And that is how the West Coast got all the smog from Paul Bunyan's big pipe. One time, Paul's men started the logs down a new river which they had never seen before. They began to notice that they were seeing familiar places over and over again. And then finally, they realized they were on the round river, which had no end. Paul knew this was a bad thing, so he shoveled out the center of the river and made it into a big lake, which is now known as Round Lake. Mosquitoes were a terrible problem. The men fought them off with pike poles and axes, and Paul brought in big bees to destroy them, but they intermarried and became worse. Their cravings for sweets caused them to swarm a fleet of ships bringing sugar to Paul's camp. They ate so much they couldn't fly, and they all drowned except 2, which Paul saved and he used for drilling holes in maple trees. When Paul was short of help, he trained some enormous ants to do some kinds of logging work. They weighed over 2,000 pounds and ate nothing but the best imported Swedish snuff. The ants did the work of 50 ordinary men. In the winter, Paul had them fitted with warm mackinaws to keep them from hibernating. Lucy, Paul's purple cow, was a champion producer and furnished Paul's dairy products. She was contented as long as the grass was green. So in the winter, Paul put on a pair of glasses on her with green lenses so that she would always think it was green. It made the snow look like grass. The year of the 2 winters, it got so cold her milk turned to ice cream before it hit the pail. That was the winter Paul invented the double-deck ice cream cone. Ole, the blacksmith, was the only man who could shoe Babe, the blue ox. Every time he made shoes for Babe, they had to open a new iron mine. One time he carried a pair of Babe's shoes, and their weight made him sink knee-deep into the hard earth with every step. In his spare time, Ole punched holes in the donuts for the cook. Paul's axemen ate so many flapjacks they couldn't supply the demand. Ole the blacksmith made a griddle so large you couldn't even see across it. And they had Sourdough Sam, who had 50 men with pork rinds tied to their feet, skating around the griddle to grease it. The batter was mixed in large barrels, and it took a strong cook just to turn the flapjacks, let alone get them to the table. But eat they did and work, and Paul Bunyan was known far and wide across the American West as the greatest lumberjack who ever lived. So that's some of the tales of Paul Bunyan. One of my favorite tidbits that I didn't mention about Paul Bunyan is it said that he and Babe were walking around Arizona with their axe. He had his axe on his shoulder and he started to drag it and he cut out the Grand Canyon. Historians believe that Bunyan was based in large part on an actual lumberjack named Fabien Fournier, a French-Canadian timberman who moved south and got a job as a foreman of a logging crew in Michigan after the Civil War. He was 6 feet tall at a time where the average man was only 5 feet tall. And he had giant hands, and he went by the nickname Saginaw Joe. He was rumored to have 2 complete sets of teeth, and he chewed wood and spitted out chunks of wood. Wooden rails, and in his spare time, he enjoyed drinking and brawling. One November night in 1875, Fournier was murdered in the notorious rowdy lumber town of Bay City, Michigan. His death and the sensational trial of his alleged killer, who was acquitted, fueled tales of Saginaw Joe's rough and tumble life and his lumbering prowess in logging camps in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and beyond. Over time, Fournier's legend merged with that of another French-Canadian lumberman, Bunyan. Jean had played a prominent role in the Popinot Rebellion of 1837, when loggers and other working men in St. Eustace, Canada, revolted against the British regime right after the crowning of Queen Victoria. The French pronunciation of Jean's full name is believed to have evolved into the surname Bunyan. So that's how we got Paul Bunyan. So that's Paul Bunyan's stories. I got one more story to share. We're coming right up on our 25-minute mark, I believe. And this is my favorite story, tall tale to tell. And I think it's because it's about a woman, and there are so few that are about women. Now, this one is complete tall tale. It's not based on anybody at all, but I love it. And this is the tale of Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind. It was more than 200 years ago when Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind came into the world. The family already had 9 boys, but there she was, a brand new daughter. Right away, Sally Ann looked up at that family of hers, and before they knew what was happening, she started to talk. "Hello," she said. "I'm Sally Ann Thunder Ann Whirlwind, and I'm simply amazing." Now, people say her parents just stood and stared at that little talking baby for a minute. Then they grinned real wide. "Well, little daughter of ours," they said, "you are amazing." Sally Ann's brothers had wanted another brother, so they weren't too impressed by this little girl. But Sally Ann wasn't going to put up with their disappointment. So she looked at those brothers of hers and said, "Brothers, let me tell you something. Whatever any one of you can do, I can do better, faster, stronger." Naturally, the boys didn't believe her. After all, this was a baby, and a girl at that. But Sally Ann truly was amazing. When she was just 1 year old, she could run faster than a wildcat, faster than all of her brothers. When she was 4, she beat them all at arm wrestling. So pretty soon, the brothers were proud of her, and they entered her into this big contest. Sally Ann ran faster than all the runners in Tennessee, and then she out wrestled all the arm wrestlers. When she was just 7, she was the toughest member of the Tennessee tug-of-war team. Sally Ann was tough and sassy, but she was pretty too, and as sweet as honey. So sweet that the hornets liked to let her use their nests for her Sunday go-to-church hat. Here's the thing about Sally Ann. She was a sweetheart, but she didn't like anybody to call her sweetheart. "Don't call me sweetie," she'd tell anyone who tried. "I can outgrin and outrun and outlift and outsneeze and outlie any old scamp from Maine to Louisiana." And that was true. When Sally grew up, she decided she wanted to see more of the world. "I'm off to seek adventure," she told her family, and she set off for the big frontier. That first winter away from home, she hibernated with the bears so she could stay warm. Then spring came, and Papa Bear woke up. He wasn't too happy when he saw her there. He snorted and scowled and growled his deepest, meanest growl. And what did Sally Ann do? She just grinned at him. She had this fabulous grin, and nothing scared her. And Papa Bear was so surprised to see that pretty girl smiling that he fell over in a faint. While he was on the ground, Sally Ann ran out of the cave. She kept wandering all through that spring and deep into the high heat of summer. They say it was a pretty day that summer when Sally Ann came upon a hickory tree and saw something strange. It was a man's head, and that head was wearing a coonskin cap, and it was stuck in the crook of a tree. But it wasn't just any man. The man stuck in that tree was the famous Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. Sally Ann didn't recognize him, though. She just said, "Now, how are you going to set yourself free?" But before Davy could answer, Sally Ann saw something else. She spotted a nest of rattlesnakes down near a bush beside her. That gave her a great idea. So she snatched those rattlesnakes, all 6 of them, and knotted them together and made a lasso. Then she lassoed the branch and tugged just one stiff tug, and pop, Davy's head was free. Naturally, Davy was mildly impressed, and he introduced himself to Sally Ann. She smiled. She liked the look of this fella. And besides, everyone knew Davy Crockett. He was famous far and wide. So Sally Ann thought for 1 second and said, Davy, how about we get hitched? Let's get married. And that's what they did. They were happy, people said, and they had 10 children. When their first son was born, they named him Hardstone. And soon after that, Davy Crockett left home for a while to go to Washington. He kissed Sally Ann and Hardstone goodbye. He wouldn't be back for a while, but he knew they'd be all right. That very night, just as Sally Ann was about to lie down to go to sleep, she looked out the window and she saw a whole gang of ferocious alligators surrounding her house. Now, Sally Ann was determined to protect that little baby of theirs. So she ran outside and started flinging those alligators this way and that. From that day on, everyone in the whole wide world knew that Sally Ann, Thunder Ann Whirlwind, was the bravest woman anywhere and the strongest. Well, most people knew. Some folks didn't believe it, but when they tried to test her strength, her courage, and her wits, they always discovered it was true. Sally Ann was really amazing, just like she said. Now, Sally Ann, Thunder Ann Whirlwind, although is not based on a real person. Davy Crockett is a real person. He was married twice, and neither one of his wives was named Sally Ann, Thunder Ann Whirlwind. So this is a fictitious tall tale. And I think it has a moral, and the moral is that women on the frontier worked just as hard as the men did. They did just as much work. They had to have just as much strength. They had to be prepared for all kinds of things that they didn't see coming, and they really were the backbone of the pioneer society. And so I think this story pays homage to that. So that's one of the reasons why I like to tell it. Well, that's all I have. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Anna, and we're going to take some questions now.
Perfect. Got a couple questions for you. First one's actually a statement because after the Paul Bunyan story, I had a bunch of people message in that they're going to go out for pancakes after this for a late lunch. So you made them all hungry. So what made you want to get into storytelling?
Well, I think it's because my father is a writer, and my grandmother always told us stories. So she wasn't a writer per se, but she would tell us these stories of her home in Bermuda, and how her they came from Ellis Island. They came through Ellis Island from Bermuda, and I think that generationally, it really inspired me, and it helped me to make sense of life in a way that I couldn't, if that makes sense. Um, One of the things that I subscribe to is the thought that storytelling changes lives, and that you can tell someone your life story and they can never deny your story because it's your story. So stories are important, and stories have meaning, and stories have values, and stories can be used to teach. And I'm an educator by heart, and so I love storytelling. I hope that answered that question.
What books did your father write?
My father is a poet, and he wrote a book called Making Eyes Through Mourning. He's done a number of small anthologies. He owns a small nonprofit poetry publishing company called Blind Beggar Press in New York. And if you want more information about that, you can look us up on Facebook. I recently took over operations of that from him. And so we're going to be doing some different types of books, and we're excited about the work that he's done and that we're going to continue to do. It's a way of me honoring him and continuing my family legacy.
That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Are there any tall tales that originate out of Florida or the Southeast?
There are so many. I don't know specifically about Florida because Florida is a strange place in terms of its East Coast, but it's also deep South, whereas tall tales are mainly um, the pioneers, the settlers, the covered wagons going across the American Great Plains. I think in Florida you'd find more folk tales. So if you're interested in folk tales, I would look up Zora Neale Hurston, um, she collected a lot of folk tales from Florida and that area.
Cool. If a student wanted to write a tall tale, how should they start to develop their hero or heroine in a story?
Well, I would suggest, first of all, that if you know of someone, because a lot of these tall tales are based on a real person. If you know someone who has done something extraordinary, you take that person and then you write about them and then you double the extraordinary. So the characteristics, I went over the characteristics of a tall tale in the beginning. It is a person, a character who has done things, and then the details are so unbelievable, but the story is told in a believable way. And so I would start with taking someone you really know and adding to their abilities. So say somebody wanted to write about somebody who was a singer, and they sing really well. I would start off by talking about how they sung so high that the birds would come and fly down every time they hit a high note. And the birds would listen to them sing, and the birds would do whatever it is that the song suggested. That's the main way you would start. And then you think of a problem, something specific, a situation or a circumstance that you can address with the same kind of quality. So like with Paul Bunyan, he was a logger. And so all of his situations come out in terms of lumberjacking, problems that lumberjacks face, I guess, needing to shoe his big blue ox, needing to cut down trees, needing to feed everybody in the camp, those kinds of things. And so take it and exaggerate it to the utmost that you can exaggerate it. That's how I would start.
Cool. How many tall tales are based off of real people?
Oh, I have no idea. There's so many tall tales. You'd have to read them and then do the research. Gosh, I have no clue because I just picked my 3 favorite, but there are tons. I had a list and I should have printed it out and brought it with me so I could read to you a list. But if you Google lists of tall tales, you'll come up with all of them. Pecos Bill and trying to think of some other people. Davy Crockett, Johnny Appleseed, the book that you mentioned, Mark Fink, I think it is, at the beginning. People are still writing in that vein today. So there are newer tall tales. There's the Swamp Angel, which was one I was going to tell, but time got away from me, and so I couldn't tell that one. But I don't know it very well, but I prefer Sally Ann Thunder and Whirlwind.
So Sally Ann Thunder and Whirlwind's your favorite. What's your second favorite?
Probably John Henry, because it speaks a lot to the ability of man or woman to beat machinery. I think we get so caught up on technology and relying on things that are supposed to make our lives easier, which they do, but when they go down, wow, it's like we just can't function. So I think I like the moral of that story, that man is just important as technology, or more important than technology. Technology cannot replace man or woman.
So this one's a kind of a two-parter. Are there any characters or stories that show up in myth, tall tale, and legend, or tall tales that have similarities to myth and legend?
I don't know. I think you have to know the difference between myth and legend. Legend is thousands and thousands of years ago, and legends you can't determine if they're true or not. Myths are stories that are fantastical, but they also, myths and legends are closer to each other than a tall tale is to them. So I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up and see. Excuse me.
No problem. Well, that is all the time we have for today. So everyone, a hearty thank you again to Dr. Naima Johnston Bush for a wonderful program. I don't know about y'all, but I sure had fun. If you want to learn more about our summer programs, please check out hcplc.org/summer. And if you want to know more about Dr. Naima Johnston Bush and what she does, go on and check out www.windsor, spelled WIN, D as in dog, SOR 413.com. So I hope everyone had a good time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.